Hey everyone. So I'm trying something a little bit new this week. First of all, as you can see, I'm actually using a microphone this week. And I've noticed that some of my audio quality in the past has been, let's say, mediocre. But the bigger thing that I'm changing is I got some advice from a friend, David, recently. And he was saying, Patrick, you put a lot of effort into content, but you make it somewhat inaccessible in I'm paraphrasing him, in the length of the content. So he recommended putting together some shorter videos and audio segments that people can just get in sort of bite-sized format. So that's going to be this week, and I'm going to do a couple videos slash short audio segments, and then I'm going to sort of pepper them around here and there. They're going to go over basic topics, and they're generally going to be about 5 minutes long. So this week, what I wanted to do was talk about uh, conservatives and progressives, which is something that I talk about semi regularly. It's sort of unavoidable right now with the politics that are going on, right? I think the thing that you'll like is that I am addressing it in a different way than the rabble that you hear on social media and in the news. So basically, I differentiate the ideologies and kind of tell you where they came from and sort of some of the hypocrisies that exist today. From what I see, they're often mirror images of each other without even really realizing it. So, to get started, I'll talk about conservatism. So, conservatism, really, as it is currently defined, came into its own in the 50s during the Cold War, and it was really defined in opposition of the Soviet Union. So, the thing that it defended was what was Americanism, and it sort of merged with the idea of some social conservative values, like the family and some generally Christian religious values, but also um, it became basically a coalition of different things that meant that were basically differently valued by different people. So the people who were in it for the economic reasons necessarily didn't share the same philosophy as the people who were in it for the social reasons. And conservatism today is sort of a strange cousin of what it was back during the era of the Soviet Union, because ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, you've had a ideology in need of something to define itself against. And one of the big things that modern conservatism defines itself against are things that are un-American. And one of the biggest enemies today is terrorism. So there was a shift from the major enemy being the Russians, the Soviets, to being terrorists. It's important to note that, ironically, the thing that defines what a lot of conservatives believe, the belief in the Constitution, is actually liberalism. So liberalism in the classical sense is really what came out of the Enlightenment. The people, the founding fathers who came out of the Enlightenment and believed the ideas of, private property and rule of law and republican form of government, constitutional authority and representative government, all of these things, individualism, all of these came out of the Enlightenment, and they were what defined classical liberalism. So the definition of the word liberal has changed, and today conservatives actually defend the liberal tradition as created by the founding fathers and embedded into the Constitution. So the definitions change over time. Now, conservative, the ideology, sits inside of today the vessel that is known as the Republican Party, but that changes over time as well. So what is the Republican Party today is not what it was back during when Lincoln he was the first Republican president. So it's changed over time. Another interesting, more modern ideology is progressivism, and that as well has changed over time. And effectively, the ideas surrounding progressivism are related to advancing society as much as possible, creating there's sort of a bit of a fusion with some socialist ideology and there is an attempt to protect any group, any minority fragment of the population that is experiencing some type of oppression. So that is really where the ideology of progressivism stands today. Originally, it was conceived of at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was really a movement that involved Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, the muckrakers, and the party that had the idea of reforming all of these institutions that were corrupt, like the famous Chicago meatpacking industry, um, and starting social initiatives that were going to improve working conditions. And basically, it was the American attempt to deal with the issues of industrialization and how it was affecting people, particularly workers. So it was a variation on things that were occurring elsewhere in the world, like fascism and communism. Um, so I'm not saying it was as bad as those, but it was the unique American response. Um, so today, the progressive ideology resides within the Democratic Party, that vessel, and it also gets switched up with the word liberal, which, as I explained before, is something pretty different. There's a slight overlap, but I think essentially progressivism really started to get a bad name after World War II because of its connection with eugenics and some of its fairly sinister history, just like conservative has an association with battling against making an alliance with Southern racists that were anti-integration during the civil rights era. So I think when progressives realized that their ideology had a bad rap, they tried to take on the in the public mind the idea that they were liberal. So they sort of co-opted that term more. Now, the irony that exists today is that these two, at least in the media, these two ideologies compete and exist in the minds of most people in polar opposition to each other, when in reality they're very similar and there is a lot of hypocrisy. So there are about 4 or 5 hypocrisies that I wrote down, and one of them is their attitudes towards job programs. So first of all, you have progressives who generally endorse government jobs programs, jobs for all. You think about what the New Deal was, it was a jobs program. You think about current government administrations and what conservatives criticize as bureaucracies. Those often were endorsed by, not purely for the job creating, but often endorsed by progressives. So EPA, OSHA, all of these things, they enforce some progressive regulation and also create jobs. So a lot of this is the hypocrisy of conservatives in this sense, is that conservatives say that they're against job programs, but they don't acknowledge that the military is used as a modern job program where people with little opportunity often are recruited into the military, either um, pull like they go themselves looking to join the military, or they're actively recruited, and it's it becomes a job program over time where it's equivalent to basically a welfare benefit program, but with patriotism brewed in as well. So, um, and obviously a work component. So I think a lot of conservatives would bristle at that comparison. And that brings me to my next point, which is conservatives tend to call progressive snowflakes because of their, and justifiably, because a lot of them have the attitude of social justice above everything, and everything is offensive in some regard. But then, and generally, those attitudes are about bigotry. So, sort of flipping over every rock to find bigotry, and pointing it out wherever it can possibly be um, imagined or seen. And the same thing occurs with conservatives with political correctness. And their fierce defense is, instead of over race and bigotry, it's over patriotism. And basically, instead of accusing people of being bigots, of being unpatriotic. So there's that rather annoying sometimes when you're trying to make a point, because you can be critical of things that America does and still be not anti-America. I am often critical about things that America does. I am not anti-America. Also, I can also be critical of racial theories and points that people make about bigotry without being a racist or a bigot. So conservatives tend to basically flip over rocks looking for instances of political correctness, even when they're not really, they're sort of addicted to outrage in their own right, but it's more of a quieter outrage. It's not generally as freak out as some of the social justice outrage, admittedly, but it's its own version of chasing outrage, just like the social justice version is. Now, the third thing is the negative histories of both. And I alluded to this before, where this is the hypocrisy on the progressive side, is they criticize conservatives for being associated with the Jim Crow era, being associated with anti-integration, being opposed to instances of social justice or of civil rights. And yeah, those are there is association of some of the members of the conservative coalition. Remember, because both conservatives and progressives are a coalition, so the progressive coalition consists of people who are more casually into regulating certain things, and then downright communists, just like the right hand side is more into people who support a stronger United States and people who believe in a white ethno state. So those people don't believe in the same thing, but they occupy for different reasons the same coalition. Now, the criticism against the right and against the conservatives is not exactly fair. It's honest in that there are some people that have that bad connection from history, but it's not owning up to the progressive history, which is not very good. If you look at the history of Woodrow Wilson, what he believed, if you look at the eugenics movement, if you look at a lot of the early sort of scientific racism and the birth control movement, and really a lot of different fascist tendencies, censorship, and like I said before, progressivism was basically the American version of responding to the Industrial Revolution, and it was proto-fascist. So there's an irony in that, because today a lot of the accusations of fascism go towards the political right. Now, another interesting hypocrisy is that you might have heard of the term intersectionalism. This is a term conceived of by modern progressives, and particularly the feminist movement. And the idea is that the second wave of feminism that occurred mid-century, related to women leaving the household, didn't incorporate the variation between different women, because you have Black women, you have gay women, trans women, you have all different types of women, and their experiences are not the same. So the notion of intersectionality was that you can never compare or know the sufferings of different women, because the different aspects of their identity intersect in different ways. Now, there's truth to this, but ultimately it's ironic, because the ultimate end of intersectionality is individualism, which is a concept of conservatives and traditional liberalism and the political right. So if you think about it, you can divide the individual person into infinite possible identity segments, whether they're handicapped, what race they are, gender, if they grew up in a nice area, if they had an intact family structure, if they inherited money, every type of privilege or every type of identity segment. And even people within the same group, different white people, different black people, whatever, like nobody had the same experience. There's no single identity that you can pick a type of person and say across the board, this is their experience. So ultimately what intersectionality is saying is you can divide people in infinite number of ways and you get an extremely unique experience. You never know somebody else's trials and tribulations exactly. And the irony of that is that's exactly what individualism is saying. It's saying that all individuals are unique and have unique experiences and unique things to bring to the world and should be allowed to flourish. So it's almost an instance of going so far left that you come out on the other side on the right. Now, the last thing that I wanted to bring up, which I thought was pretty interesting, I was actually thinking about it when I was painting today, is this is another hypocrisy of progressives. They criticize conservatives and people on the right typically for using the word terrorist too freely and saying things like, if you accuse people of being terrorists or you're overly bigoted or overly zealous in applying that label, then you'll actually create more terrorists if you're not careful, because they'll use that as recruiting material. Now, there's something to be said for that, right? But why is that not equally applied to accusing someone of being a white supremacist or a bigot or something uh, in the racial don't go there category? You know what? Why is it you can freely call someone a Nazi or a fascist or a white supremacist or a bigot and not worry that you are inadvertently propagating their ideology and creating recruitment material for them, which is actually happening and it has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, just as it has with terrorism, right? And by the way, I do endorse the idea of labeling white nationalist and white supremacist ideologies as domestic terrorist belief systems, just as I would uh, fundamentalist Islam as a terrorist ideology. So, yeah, I just think that we need to be a little bit more particular and a little bit more thoughtful in the way that we consider the definitions and the people and the beliefs before us. So that's all I've got for tonight. The next one, I'll talk, I think, a bit about fascism, communism, terms that people generally don't know what they actually mean. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments, drop me a message, whatever, and expect more of these. Good night, everyone.